Wow, look at that. It smells amazing. Thank you, ma'am.
Wade Brennan of the Rocking W Ranch had sent for a mail-order bride, expecting a sturdy frontier woman who could handle a chuck wagon and feed a hungry crew without complaint. When Martha stepped off the stagecoach, all lace gloves and polite city manners, he immediately assumed she had never peeled a potato or lit a cook stove in her entire sheltered life. He muttered to his foreman that he would probably waste away or be forced to hire a separate cook, never once considering that his judgment might be as thin as a prairie mirage. Martha caught the skeptical glances and heard the whispered jokes about her delicate hands, but she simply smiled and asked to be shown the kitchen, a quiet determination shining in her steady brown eyes. For 3 days, she only rearranged the pantry and asked endless questions about the men's favorite meals, while Wade's frustration simmered like a kettle about to boil over and ruin everything. But when that fourth sunset arrived, and Martha lifted the lid on a simmering cast iron pot, the aroma that rolled across the yard halted every cowboy in his tracks, as if the earth itself had whispered a heavenly secret. The entire crew, dusty and bone-tired, drifted toward the cookhouse like men in a trance, drawn by a scent that promised comfort and a taste of home they had long forgotten existed on the trail. Wade stood at the back of the crowd, arms folded and ready to scowl, but his expression crumbled when he saw the enormous spread of golden biscuits, rich stew, and a bubbling fruit cobbler that looked divine. Old Gus, the most grizzled and hard-to-please ranch hand, took one spoonful of the beef stew and let a tear roll down his sun-scorched cheek without a hint of shame or any care for his rough reputation. The men ate in reverent silence for a full 10 minutes before the first murmur of pure gratitude broke loose, and soon the bunkhouse was ringing with laughter and requests for second helpings that Martha graciously filled. Wade tasted the meal himself with a skeptical fork, and the explosion of flavor caused him to close his eyes and realize that he had gravely misjudged a woman who clearly possessed profound culinary magic. He learned that night that Martha had been raised by a grandmother who ran a famous hotel kitchen back east, where she mastered every recipe and technique that could turn simple ingredients into legendary feasts. Word of Martha's cooking spread faster than wildfire across the open range, and soon neighboring ranchers and drifting cowpokes began showing up at the Rocking W gate exactly at supper time with hopeful grins. Martha never turned away a single soul, simply added more water to the stew and more flour to the biscuits, her kitchen becoming a sanctuary where no traveler left with an empty belly or a heavy heart. Wade's initial embarrassment over his foolish assumptions slowly transformed into a deep, swelling pride as he watched his wife command the cookhouse with the grace of a symphony conductor on the prairie. The ranch began to prosper in unexpected ways because grateful neighbors started trading fresh vegetables, dairy, and even lumber for a taste of Martha's cooking and the fellowship that accompanied every generous meal. A weary sheriff once rode 20 miles out of his way just to enjoy a plate of her famous molasses-glazed ham, claiming it did more for his spirit than a month of Sundays in a church pew. Martha taught the younger ranch hands how to properly knead dough and season a stew, and in turn they taught her to ride and recognize the calls of every bird in the canyon, weaving a true family together. Wade found himself lingering in the kitchen just to watch her work, and one evening he finally apologized for doubting her, his voice rough with a humility that she met only with a warm and forgiving embrace. She told him that she had traveled west hoping not just for a husband but for a purpose, and that feeding his whole ranch had given her a joy that no city parlor could ever supply or satisfy. As the seasons turned, the Rocking W became known as the place where the coffee was always hot, the welcome was always sincere, and the supper table stretched as far as a man's honest appetite could carry him. When a terrible spring storm trapped 20 cattle drovers in the canyon, Martha organized a kitchen brigade that produced enough food to sustain them all for 3 days until the waters finally receded safely. The story of how she turned a humble chuck wagon into a legendary community kitchen traveled all the way to the territorial newspaper, which printed her recipe for sourdough bread and called her the Angel of the Tablelands. Wade would often stand at the bunkhouse door after supper and watch his wife laugh with the men, realizing that her gift had not just filled stomachs but had knitted an entire territory together in a bond of shared sustenance. Their own children arrived in good time, and from the moment they could walk, they helped pick garden vegetables and stir batter, learning that love often tastes like fresh butter and sage-scented gravy on a cold morning. Old adversaries and rival ranchers who once exchanged only cold nods now broke bread at Martha's table and settled disputes between mouthfuls of her famous peach pie, finding peace in the communion of good food. She never stopped collecting recipes from every wanderer who passed through, building a handwritten book that became thicker than a family Bible and was treated with a reverence reserved for priceless heirlooms. One summer, a renowned chef from San Francisco heard the legend and traveled incognito to taste her cooking. And after one meal, he declared her skillet cornbread a masterpiece that surpassed any urban restaurant creation. Martha simply laughed and said the secret was cooking with an open heart on a fire built by honest hands, a philosophy that no fine dining establishment could ever duplicate behind its fancy curtains. Wade discovered that his true wealth was not measured in cattle or land, but in the endless parade of contented faces that passed through their home, each one a testament to the power of a nourished soul. On his 50th birthday, the entire community surprised him with a potluck celebration where every dish was a variation of a Martha-inspired recipe, a culinary choir singing the praises of the woman he had nearly dismissed. Martha stood beside him under a canopy of stars and whispered that she had initially feared he would be a cold and rigid man, but his willingness to change his mind had been the real miracle of their union. He told her that the day she fed his whole ranch was the day his heart finally learned to hunger for the right things, including kindness, humility, and the wisdom to see beyond a pair of lace gloves. Years later, when young couples sought advice on marriage, Wade would chuckle and warn them never to underestimate a mail-order bride, especially one who arrives with a quiet smile and a secret family cookbook tucked away in her trunk. The Rocking W Ranch House eventually became a regular stop on the stagecoach line, and passengers would press their faces to the windows just to catch a whiff of whatever Martha was simmering on the stove that day. Martha trained a trio of local girls in the art of ranch cooking, ensuring that her legacy would feed the valley long after she had hung up her favorite apron and taken to resting in the porch swing at twilight. One of her most devoted students married the son of a former rival rancher, and their wedding feast featured Martha's own roasted wild turkey with cornbread stuffing, cementing a truce that once seemed utterly impossible. Wade and Martha grew old together in the same kitchen where their story began, the wooden table worn smooth by thousands of elbows and countless shared prayers of gratitude before meals big and small. Even when arthritis curled her fingers, Martha would sit by the stove and direct her grandchildren, her palate as sharp as ever, and her laughter still capable of filling every corner of the rambling house. Wade passed first, quietly on a Sunday afternoon, and his final words were a request that the ranch never let the cook stove go cold because that warmth had been the very heartbeat of their blessed life. Martha carried on for a few more autumns, still baking biscuits for any stranger, and the line of mourners at her funeral stretched from the ranch gate clear to the butte where the cattle grazed in quiet remembrance. The recipe book she left behind was copied by hand and distributed across the territory, each page bearing a note that said, "Feed the hungry heart, and the rest will follow as surely as spring rain." To this day, on the second Saturday of every October, the community hosts the Martha Brennan Frontier Supper in the old ranch yard, where strangers become friends over Dutch oven stew and skillet bread cooked over open flames. Travelers who stumble upon the gathering often remark that they have never felt so welcomed in a place they had no intention of visiting, and they leave with full stomachs and an inexplicable sense of belonging. The tale of the man who thought his mail-order bride could not cook and the woman who ended up feeding the world around her is now told as a creation story of compassion, community, and the sacredness of shared meals. It reminds all who listen that the greatest gifts often arrive wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and that a single act of humble service can transform an entire landscape of loneliness into a map of connection. Wade's old foreman, long retired and creaky, still swears that Martha's coffee could revive a dead mule and that her beef stew once cured him of a 2-week melancholy during a particularly harsh winter. Every generation adds its own chapter to the legend, and the ranch kitchen now houses a small museum where visitors can see the original cast iron skillet and the one wooden spoon that stirred 1,000 miracles. If you stand very still in that room during the quiet hour before dawn, some claim you can still hear the gentle humming of a woman who turned simple ingredients into a language of love that everyone understood. That humming is not a ghost story, but a reminder that kindness echoes forever, and that a cook who serves without prejudice can leave an eternal mark on the soul she nourishes without even knowing their names. So the cowboy, who once thought his mail-order bride incapable of cooking, learned that the richest feasts are those that humble the proud and fill the empty spaces between people with something far greater than mere food. Her kitchen became a frontier common ground where differences melted like butter on hot sourdough, proving that a shared table can heal wounds that sermons and treaties often fail to reach or even acknowledge. And when the stars shine down on the rocking W tonight, somewhere a campfire crackles and a pot bubbles as another storyteller begins the same old, wonderful narrative of Martha and the meal that changed a territory. If this heartwarming frontier tale of hidden gifts and boundless hospitality stirred your appetite for more, then please like this video and subscribe to West Old Stories Official so we can keep bringing the West alive together. Now write into the comments and share a memory of someone whose talent caught you completely by surprise, because your stories are the lifeblood of this channel and the reason we gather around the digital campfire every single week.